Hi everyone, welcome back to another English lesson. I am Niharika, your English trainer. Now we all have different voices. Each voice is different and unique. Do you agree? Hence, there are different English words and phrases to describe them. Now in today's lesson, we will learn how to use descriptive language to talk about the various characteristics of someone's voice, such as pitch, tone, and accent. We will also discuss how to identify and describe different types of voices, such as those with high-pitched, low-pitched, deep, nasally. So let's get started. The first one that I have for you is a small voice. Now, a small voice typically refers to a voice that is soft or quiet in volume. Definitely not mine. Well, it can also imply that the voice has a lack of confidence or hesitation in the speaker. So we have some examples for you so that you know how to use this in your sentence. He had a small voice, but his words carried a lot of weight. She tried to speak up, but her small voice was drowned out by the others in the room. He whispered the secret into her ears in a small voice. Now remember, it could also be used in a more figurative sense of speaking to indicate an inner voice or inner intuition. For example, I knew deep down it was the wrong decision, but I couldn't hear that small voice inside me. The small voice inside me told me to stop, but I kept going. Isn't it interesting? So here is a way to describe a small voice. Use this in your sentences. Write these sentences in the comments, and I would love to read them all. Moving on, we have another kind of voice that is a shaking voice. Now, a shaking voice typically refers to a voice that is trembling or unsteady. Someone could have a shaking voice due to a strong emotion, such as fear, nervousness, or maybe even sadness for that matter. So here are a few examples for you to understand better. He tried to speak, but his voice was shaking with fear. She broke down in tears and her voice was shaking as she spoke. He had a shaking voice as he delivered the bad news. Her voice was shaking as she made the confession. Now remember, it could also be used in a more literal sense to indicate a physical trembling of the vocal cords or the speaker's body. Take a look at these examples here. She has a cold and her voice was shaking due to chills. He had a shaking voice caused by severe cold and cough. Now it's important to note that a shaking voice can indicate variety of emotions and even physical conditions. So, the context is key to understand is the full meaning. Someone might get offended, so be a little careful. Next up is a squeaky voice. Squeaky voice typically refers to a voice that is high-pitched, thin, and often associated with children. Like, you know how the kids speak in a loud and a thin voice? Hi! That's the squeaky voice for you. Now, here are a few examples. He tried to sing, but his voice was just a squeaky sound. She was so nervous that her voice came out as a squeaky whisper. He had a squeaky voice when he tried to speak in public. Now, it could also be used in a more metaphorical sense to indicate lack of confidence or assertiveness. Like, she had a squeaky voice when she asked for a raise. His voice were a squeaky one unable to stand up for himself. So that's how you can use squeaky voice in your conversation. Now here is the next one, which I totally love, is a husky voice. Yes, that's my favorite. A husky voice typically refers to a voice that is low-pitched, rough, and often associated with a gravely or a raspy quality, as the speaker has a hoarseness or cold. Here are some examples for you. She had a husky voice that made her sound seductive. He woke up with a husky voice after a night of partying. The singer had a husky voice that added a lot of character to his performance. Now remember guys, it could also be used in a more metaphorical sense to indicate lack of confidence or assertiveness. For example, he had a husky voice when he told the truth. She had a husky voice when she confessed her love. Now please note that one can have a husky voice for a variety of reasons, such as cold, or because of excessive smoking, or even due to some medical condition. Okay, but that is a type of voice. Up next I have for you is a gruff voice. A gruff voice typically refers to a voice that is low-pitched, rough, and often associated with a harsh or a gravely quality that can make it sound unfriendly, abrupt, or even angry. It could also indicate a person who speaks in a curt or an abrupt manner. Here are a few examples for you to understand this better. He answered the phone with a gruff voice, still groggy from sleep. The old man always had a gruff voice, but it was just his way of talking. Now, this voice could also be used in a more metaphorical sense to indicate lack of politeness or even patience. For example, he had a gruff voice when he was dealing with customer service. She had a gruff voice when she was giving instructions to her employees. Now, one could have a gruff voice for many reasons, such as stress, maybe they're in a bad mood, or even a medical condition. So, I hope this is clear to you. Now, here is the next kind, that is muffled voices. Now, did you hear that? Can you make out what someone is trying to say? It's kind of blurred, right? Well, that's muffled voice. Muffled voice are voices that are not clear because they are soft and they come from distance. Muffled voices are soft and they're obstructed because of walls or doors. Now, here are some examples. The sound of muffled voices came from behind the closed doors. I could barely hear the muffled voices on the other end of the phone line. The music was so loud that the singer's muffled voice was barely audible. The walls were thick, so the muffled voices of the people in the next room didn't disturb us. Okay, so I hope that's clear to you guys. Next up is to slur your words. Now, to slur your word means to speak indistinctly or in a way that makes it difficult for the others to understand what you're really trying to say. Now, this can be because if you are under influence of alcohol or drugs, or probably you have a speaking disorder, or you have some physical condition that makes you to slur too much. Now, here are a few examples. He had a stroke and couldn't help but to slur his words. The singer was so tired that he began to slur his words during the concert. Or that girl was so intoxicated that she started slurring and one could not understand her. Okay, so hope these examples are helpful and you are able to understand the difference between these voices and how to use it in your conversations. Okay, everyone, now let's talk about accent. A broad accent. Now, a broad accent refers to a strong or a pronounced accent that is typically of a particular regional area. It is generally used to describe accents that are easily recognizable and distinct from the standard or neutral accent of a language. For example, the Punjabi accent or the South Indian accent, or a Scottish accent, or a Spanish accent for that matter. Now, these are distinctive accents. In short, a broad accent means a very strong accent. Now, this is how you could use in your sentences. She had a broad accent that was unmistakably Indian. His broad accent made it clear that he was from the deep south. The character in the movie spoke with a broad accent that was meant to be a parody of a New York accent. Now, the next one that I have for you is a trace of an accent. Now, this phrase is exactly the opposite of the broad accent. A trace of accent means to have a slight or very subtle regional accent that is not easily recognizable or distinct. It is usually used to describe a person who speaks a language that is not their first language, but it has a hint of the fluency of their regional language. Like really a hint of it, okay? Absolutely opposite to broad accent, where broad accent you can actually make out, but here you cannot. Now, he had a trace of accent that was hard to place, but it was clear that he had spent some time abroad. Despite living in United States for many years, she still had a trace of an accent from her native country. The news anchor had a trace of an accent that was not easily recognizable, but it made her speech sound more pleasant. Here is an interesting phrase for you, which is a stony silence. Now, a stony silence refers to a complete lack of response or reaction, often in a situation where a response is expected. It is typically used to describe a situation when someone is angry, upset, or unresponsive and is not willing to speak or engage in any kind of communication. Now, that strange silence is called a stony silence. Have you experienced that before? And let's understand this better with some examples. He met with a stony silence when he tried to apologize for his mistake. The room was filled with a stony silence as the jury announced the verdict. She was greeted with a stony silence when she tried to start a conversation with her co-workers. The crowd was in a stony silence as the singer forgot the lyrics to the song. Now, the last phrase that I have for you is an eerie silence. Now, a silence that is strange, unsettling, or even frightening. It is often used to describe a silence that is out of the ordinary, such as silence in a desert or an abandoned place, like a ghost factory or a graveyard, or in a situation where noise is expected but this is not present. For example, in a construction building, you are sure to hear workers and the noise of machines. But guess what? There's an eerie silence. That is so strange, right? Here are some more interesting examples for you. The house was abandoned and there was an eerie silence that made me feel uneasy. The city was in an eerie silence after the power went out. The once bustling street was now in an eerie silence not a soul in the night. The graveyard had an eerie silence that made me feel like I was being watched. Well, from muffled to squeaky, from broad to eerie, each voice tells us a unique story. Now remember to listen closely and pay attention to voices around you and the sounds around you, as it can reveal so much about a person and the world around us. So these were the 10 different ways to talk about the everyday sounds and voices that we hear. I hope you learned something new today. Now give this lesson a thumbs up, subscribe and share it with your friends, and I shall see you with a new lesson super soon. Until then, keep learning and keep practicing English. Thank you.